Today's lesson is out of the book of Daniel, chapter number 1. Okay? Book of Daniel, chapter number 1. And Nebuchadnezzar was a king of Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar took over Judah and Jerusalem. And they took some captives, some boys for slaves, and they took Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Wow.
And Daniel. But Shadrach, Abednego, and Meshach, their real names were Hananiah, this is Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, and Daniel. That was their Hebrew names. But the prince of the eunuchs gave them the names of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego.
Wow.
Okay? So, these four were very smart. They loved God, and they were taught about God, and they were very smart in math. They were smart in languages.
Wow.
But they could speak other languages. And so the language that King Nebuchadnezzar spake and his kingdom was Chaldean. And the king wanted some young men that he could teach the language of the Chaldeans to.
Wow.
And he wanted young men that he could teach in math and be really smart. So he put a prince of the eunuchs over them to teach them. And he said, for 3 years, I want them to be taught so that they can learn. And he said, then they'll be put before me and I will choose out the smartest ones.
Wow.
It wasn't just them, it was other young men too. He said, but he wanted them to eat only of the king's meat and to drink the king's wine. Well, guess what? That was against Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego's God. They were not to eat meat that was offered to idols. And the king this was meat that the king had offered up to his false gods, his false idols. And they were not to eat that. God didn't want them eating meat that was offered to false gods. He wanted them to only serve him because he's the true God, right? The God of this Bible is the true God. So they told that, here, you hold him. Prince of the eunuch. Hold him where they all can see him. Okay? And they said, we cannot eat the king's meat because it's been offered to idols and God forbids us to do that. And we do not obey man, we obey God.
Yeah.
So the guy said, well, I'm afraid you're going to get me in trouble and you guys in trouble because the king wants you to do this. If you disobey the king, you're going to get us all in trouble. And they said, no, we're going to make you a deal. They said, you try us for 10 days on nothing but, we're going to change the food here, and it's not going to be the king's meat anymore. It's going to be pulse and water. Not king's meat offered to idols and wine. It's going to be pulse and water. And pulse is vegetables. And a certain kind of vegetables like beans and peas and seeds that were in pods. And that's what they were going to eat. They weren't going to eat the king's meat because that would be disobeying God, right?
Yep, and you said water.
And water, yep, instead of the wine. So the prince of the eunuchs, he says, I don't know. They said, you just let us eat nothing but pulse and water, the beans and the vegetables, they said, for 10 days, and then you come look at us, and the other young men, captives, they can eat the king's meat and the wine, but we're not going to. And then you compare us to them, and you see who looks the best.
Wow.
And the prince of the eunuch, he said, okay, it's a deal. So for 10 days, count them, 1, 2, 3,
4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, because 5 makes 10.
5 plus 5 makes 10. So 10 days, they ate nothing but pulse and water. And what was pulse? Do you remember?
Vegetables.
Yes.
Beans.
And beans. Very good. And lentils. You ever seen a lentil?
No.
They look kind of like a split pea, about this big, and they're green. And instead of a whole round pea, they're like cut in half.
Wow.
So, for 10 days, they ate nothing but pulse and water.
Wow.
And here comes the eunuch. And he looks at them, and he looks at the other men that ate the king's meat and the king's wine.
Oh.
And guess what?
What?
Daniel and Mishael and Azariah and Hananiah, they all looked way better than the other ones. Their face was healthy. They even gained weight. They got fatter, and they looked so healthy. And he said, it worked. He said, obeying your God, eating what your God tells you to eat, worked. You're way better. So then he said, you can continue to eat the pulse and drink the water. And they said, thank you. He said, I won't make you eat the king's meat offered to idols. And they said, thank you. Now the time came. Time went by and time went by. And they were learning their math, and astrology means the way the stars are in the sky. And they were learning the Chaldean language. And time went by. And I think about 3 years went by. And the king wanted to see him. Okay, now you hold the king. Okay? That's King Nebuchadnezzar.
Okay.
Can you say Nebuchadnezzar?
Nebuchadnezzar.
Very good. Okay, all right, turn him around. Okay, so here comes Daniel. Here comes Hananiah,
Yep.
Mishael,
Yes.
and Azariah.
Yep.
Okay, and they're going to stand before the king. Okay, turning this way. Okay, they're going to stand before the king, and he's going to look at them. And he's going to look at the other young men, too, that were eating. What did the other young men eat?
The meat and wine, and they didn't come like for other people, and so they got really bad and not healthy.
Yep, they weren't healthy looking, weren't they?
No.
As healthy as these guys, because they were eating the king's meat offered to idols,
Yes.
false gods.
Yeah, and they should obey the book of Leviticus.
They should have obeyed the book of Leviticus, where the law is.
Yep.
God's law is in the book of Leviticus, isn't it?
Yeah.
And that's where he tells us not to eat meat offered to idols.
Yes.
Okay.
Bad boys.
And they knew that, and so they obeyed God.
Yep.
Okay? And the king looked at them and he said, wow. And he started asking them questions.
Ooh.
And they answered every one of them.
Yeah.
And he said, you guys are smarter than anybody I've ever seen, and you look so healthy. And he said, you just keep doing what you're doing. And he made them big in his kingdom.
Yeah, and where the other people were eating the meat, they were bad boys, like the movie Bad Boys.
Yep. But these were good boys because they...
Yep, because they ate vegetables and water.
Yep.
And
Because,
beans.
yep, because they would not obey the king. They obeyed God. Now, our Bible verse today is we ought to obey God rather than men.
Yep.
Okay? We ought to obey God rather than men. And in just a minute, I'll tell you where that is found. Look at the picture of our verse here. We ought to obey God rather than men. Acts 5:29.
Wow.
So, the men told him, and the king told him, and the prince of the eunuch told him to eat the king's meat, didn't they?
Mm-hmm.
Offered to idols. But God says, don't eat meat that's offered to idols.
Yes.
So they obeyed God rather than the men, didn't they?
Yep.
And did they please God?
Yes.
Yes, it pleases God when we obey Him.
Yeah.
Now, what can we learn from this lesson?
Well, we can learn about always obey God and don't obey men.
That's right. Now we can obey men like policemen. We're to obey policemen. We're to obey teachers.
Yes.
And we're to obey our mommies and daddies.
Yes.
Aunts and uncles. Grandpas and grandmas.
But not kings.
But, well, we're to obey our king if he is telling us to do right.
Yeah.
But he was telling them to do wrong.
Yeah.
He was telling them to obey him instead of obey God.
Yeah.
And then we don't have to obey him if we have to disobey God.
Yeah. So if he says to do something bad, don't.
That's right. If it goes against God, then we don't do it, do we? Mm-hmm. We do what God says. And what's some things that God tells us to do in His Word? Does He tell us, thou shalt not steal?
Yes.
Thou shalt not kill?
Yes.
And He tells us to be kind?
Yes.
One to another? Yep.
Yes.
And He teaches us to share with others. And He teaches us to obey who?
God.
And who
Jesus.
else?
And Jesus.
Yes.
And the angels.
Yes. And our mommies and daddies.
Yes.
If we obey our moms and dads, are we obeying God?
Yes.
Yes, we are. So if our mom and dad tells us to pick up our toys,
Yes.
we say, I'm not going to do that.
No.
That's disobeying, isn't it?
Yes.
We need to obey God, don't we?
Say.
Okay?
Yes, ma'am. Or yes, dad.
Okay? Yes, ma'am, or yes, dad. That's right. Okay, we're going to sing a song real quick, okay?
Okay.
Trust and obey.
Trust and obey.
Okay? Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey. Sing it again. Trust and obey, for there's no other way to be happy in Jesus but to trust and obey.